Hi, welcome back. We are now going to create our first database. So you've installed at this point you've installed Postgres. You have it running on your computer, and you have access to pgadmin, the graphical user interface for it. Okay. So let's talk about what a relational database is structured like. Relational database is kind of like a spreadsheet. It has tables, um, and those tables have rows and columns. But that's where the similarity ends. So I found my little elephant icon has added itself to the toolbar here. And if it hasn't, I can get to PG admin through my applications folder, Postgres PG admin 4. So I'm going to do a new PG admin 4 window. That'll open up my web browser. And as you recall, pgadmin has this sort of lengthy hierarchy here. Servers, Postgres, databases. We have our list of databases. And under any database, we're going to create a new database here. And I am going to introduce you to with an example which is like an auction site, like an eBay. And we're going to create a database to run that e-commerce site. So I'm going to call this database AUCTagon 1. And there it is in the list. Click on it. So we got servers, Postgres, databases, AUCTagon 1, and then under that we have schemas, public, and tables. And this is where we would see our tables. But if you just click AUCTagon 1 and click this cylinder with a play button on it, that's our query tool. This is where we're going to go to write queries. Now I have a couple of little windows here. I don't know if I can make them go away. Maybe I can add them to this toolbar. Okay, I can drag and add them to this toolbar, which apparently is where they used to be. Okay, so we have our little toolbar here for notifications and messages and things. But here we can write code. We can write SQL code. I just want to see if I can increase the size of the font. Doesn't look like it. Okay, but we've got our scratch pad, and in this we can do a create table command. So a database table is like a spreadsheet except with a bunch of constraints. First of all, every row of the table has the same columns. Second of all, every column has a consistent data type which is determined in advance. So you can't have, say, a column that mixes numbers and text. Or if you have a column which is for dates and times, you can't have like pure date with no time added and then a date with a time added, right? It's either date or it's what's called timestamp, which combines date and time. Or if you have a currency column, it's not, you can't mix dollars and pounds and euros. You have to sort of pick in advance. Or you have a second column, which is what is the symbol, one column which is the amount, and one column which is the currency. But it's quite consistent. The other thing about a relational database table is that every row has to be unique. So in an auction site where you might sell an item or try to sell an item and it doesn't sell, and you might recreate that listing a week later or a month later, how does that second listing be unique? And the way we usually do it is we put in an ID number, okay, a column of the database which stores an ID number, which is not necessarily something that the user is going to see, but it's at least for the table wise, it allows us to find a specific row and to make sure that it's unique. All right, I just paused to change the font size. So now I can type a create table statement and make it bigger. Okay, so how do we define this table in SQL? First of all, we got to give it a name. So we're going to create a table of listings for our auction. And create table is SQL, listings is the name of the table. We need a couple of parentheses and a semicolon. Every command in Postgres ends with a semicolon. Now, most relational databases are the SQL is quite similar. The SQL language is quite similar, but there are some quirks, like for example, they don't all require a semicolon. Also, in Postgres, the names of tables and things are sort of case insensitive by default. So usually they're lowercase. If I type it in as listings like that, Postgres will still think of it as the lowercase listings. It's kind of the opposite of Oracle, which you type it in lowercase, it thinks of it as uppercase. If you really wanted to mix cases, you have to use double quotation marks. So if you want to do something like this, with a capital L and everything lowercase, you put double quotes around it, and it is allowed. Normally, you wouldn't do this unless you're, say, migrating a database into Postgres from some other database variety where everything is uppercase and mixed case, and you really want to keep that. Okay, but I'm going to put it in lowercase, going with the Postgres standard. The other thing is that these commands, the SQL language, does not have to be uppercase. It's also insensitive, but I usually type it in uppercase in order that it will stand out from things like this, which are names of columns or of tables or whatever. So, but in between these parentheses, what we do is we define our table in terms of what are the column names, because every row has the exact same columns, and what are their data types. So the first one, we're going to create an ID number. Again, this is so every row can be unique, and it's going to be an integer. In fact, we're not going to make it an integer. We're going to make it a serial type, which in Postgres, this is their way of making a number that starts at 1 and it goes to 2, 3, 4. Unless you specify an ID, it will automatically fill these in. So there are other databases have different ways to do that kind of sequence to create that sort of automatically generated number, but that's the one we're going to do. It is an integer type. It's just a funny kind of integer. So our listing is going to have a title. Notice that's all in black. It's just the name of the column, but it is going to be a text type. Okay, so you have to specify the data type. There are many data types available in Postgres, but text and numeric do most of what we need. So let's go ahead and set these. We can have a description, I guess. And we could have a starting price, which will be a numeric type. There are currency types, but that's a little extra complication we don't need now. Notice the underscore here. Because Postgres is case insensitive, right? If I can't really do the thing that Java programmers do, which is have a capital letter in the middle of it. So for readability, I like to put an underscore. Again, if you want to put double quotes around it, you could do this, but you don't have to. Okay, I prefer to go with lowercase. Again, just stick with what Postgres does best. In this, I'm going to have a create date, which is going to be a timestamp. In Postgres, there is a date data type, a time data type, and a timestamp data type. Timestamp combines a date and a time. There's also something called timestamp with time zone. Again, a little more complication that we don't need. If you use a timestamp, it is assumed you're giving the time in the same time as the sort of the server clock that Postgres is running on, in the same time zone. And we'll give the seller name. Okay, and these will be the columns. So what we're doing is we're defining a table that has 7 columns. Every row is going to have data in those 7 columns. They could be blank, but even blank is a value. Even an empty value is a value. So that you could think of some of them as optional because we haven't put any constraints on there. We could define those constraints later. So this creates a table if I were to click this play button here, which if the tooltip is execute/refresh, it should create the table and give me a little notification that it has created the table. Query returned successfully in 48 milliseconds. Okay, so that's the message. Okay, so notice there's a messages tab, a query editor tab here. So query editor, messages. I don't know if I can pull this up and have it be kind of on top. Okay, so the query editor is now on top and the messages are down here. And the data output would be there. Okay, now I kind of have this the way I like it. All right, so let's put some data in here. And the way you do this is with an insert query, a SQL insert query into listings. And then what you do is you list the column names that you're going to put data into. So title, description, start price, create date, auction end date. These don't have to be on one line. I can hit enter in the middle. And seller name, white space doesn't matter. I could put spaces between these. Don't have to. Readability matters, I guess. And then you put the word values, and then you put an actual row of data. So let's say old comic book. This is a classic. Start price, let's put in $25. Okay, no dollar sign, it's just a number. You'll notice that text types should have single quotations, not double quotations. So I screwed up here. A text chunk needs to have single quotes. And again, this is a difference between Postgres and some other databases, is how you use quotation marks, right? So there's small differences between the various relational databases, but there are some differences. So $25 was the start price. Let's do the create date. You can put in text, and Postgres recognizes, I think, multiple different ways of putting in a date, but kind of the standard, which I know is safe, is year, month, day with dashes in between. What is today? The 17th, I think. And then space, and then the hour and the minute. You could also put the second, and you could probably put the milliseconds somehow. But this will work, and I know it will interpret that as a timestamp. Auction end date, that's more important, right? Because people don't really care when it started, they care when it's going to end, right? Ending in 1 hour, ending in 3 hours, ending in 1 day. Let's say this is going to end the 20th. And the seller name, we'll put Joe, semicolon. So this is a command here that will insert one row of data into our listings table. Bam. Okay, query returned successfully in 40 milliseconds. It says this little command that says insert 0 and 1. 1 is the number of rows that were affected. 0, I think, would be an error code. It would tell you if something went wrong, I think. Okay, but anyway, we know the query returned successfully. So you could save this command, these set of commands. Okay, it's very nice that if you don't want to close this window and lose this data forever. It's very nice to be able to save it. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go to my desktop. Users, Joe, desktop, and I'm going to save this as creation of listings. Oh, and create it. And you will see that now there is a SQL file here called creation of listings. So this is a good way to save your work, because if you rerun it, you will rerun those commands. All right. Where'd my window go? Okay. Now, normally, this was a lot of typing. to add one row of data. Normally in the real world, you wouldn't do that. What you'd be doing is you'd write a computer program like a website that allows other people to put in data. So you would not have to type these queries over and over again. Or you might get an interface that looks kind of like a spreadsheet that lets you just type in rows. But mostly in this class, we're not going to be inserting data manually. We're going to be querying data. We want to read the data. So to facilitate this first lesson, I've created a file of fake data, fake auction listings, and you can open that file on my desktop or on the online resources for the textbook I'm writing here. I will have these scripts available. You can download this. I'll attach a link to the description of the video here. And I've created a file called AUCTagon1.sql, and it looks just like what we just did. Okay, create table listings, except two additions. First of all, drop table. I add this before my create table scripts, and it's really nice because usually I don't just do it in one go and it's done. Usually I mess it up or I need to improve it, and so I'm creating the table a whole bunch of different times before I get it right. And so, but if you just run the create table again, it'll give you an error. It'll say, oh, you can't create this table, it already exists. So if I add this drop table if exists and create table, every time I rerun the script, it'll first delete what I did and then it will create it new. Okay, so it's a nice little way to clear your plate. I've added a primary key constraint, which you don't need to know about yet, but that does make this ID number sort of guaranteed to be unique. So every row of the table is unique. And then I have insert into listings, and I've got I think about 300 sort of randomly generated silly listings for our auction site. So I downloaded this, I hit the play button, run it. Okay, my insert command says 300 rows were inserted. This all took 52 milliseconds, and now I'm set up. So if you go over here on the left, excuse me, and you click tables, are we in AUCTagon 1? Refresh. Okay. Listings is there. If we can either right click it and view and edit data, or I think we can click this sort of spreadsheet looking button here, view data. Okay, and there it is. Lots and lots of rows of data which you can look at. And query. So here's your first query. Select star from listings. In fact, we can drop the public. I guess I can't edit this query. Sort of a default one. But select star means every column from the table name shows you all the data. So in my next video, I'll show you some basic queries you can run against this table.